you're talking about like $100 million Bitcoins now in play because we've hit $100,000.
I think I'm probably one of the Bitcoiners in the world that's been on a Bitcoin standard the longest. We are not wrong in that the existing system is so fundamentally broken and dark, to be honest, that Bitcoin transition to Hyper Bitcoinization will be amazing. So essentially what you have done is on a nation level, implement the Saylor strategy, but making the IMF print your money. I think he and Max Keiser sat down in 2013 and decided to play good cop, bad cop, and then laughed between themselves. And since then, they've been throwing shit at each other, while both have been cashing in heavily on followers and capital. I've been in this space long enough now that I'm starting to have second thoughts.
Erik Dale, the man who went to Bitcoin because he wanted to live deliberately. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the end of 2025. How are you today, mate?
Thank you so much, Sean. Thanks for having me on the show. It's been one hell of a year, hasn't it?
Dude, it's been so crazy. Bitcoin's at 100K, like Trump's announced a strategic Bitcoin reserve. We've got so much to dive into. You're talking about like $100 million Bitcoins now in play because we've hit $100,000. It's all insane. I've got like a heap of questions for you, but really like that statement, you went to Bitcoin because you wanted to live deliberately. What's that about? What's that mean to you?
Oh, it's a multifaceted statement, but primarily it comes down to the fact that in the fiat system, many levels to this. In the fiat system, can you really live deliberately when there's so much direction? Can you really live deliberately when there are so many moral qualms with investing your resources and your time into a system that you know is exploitative and destructive to human activity and the human spirit? I think in Bitcoin, there are many compromises you'll have to make in your life if you want to go all the way on Bitcoin right now. We are not at the point where it's as easy or as accessible as everything else. But if you want to live deliberately, if you want to control your own destiny, if you want to control your own finances and have your incentives, not pure, but purer from malign influences, then I think you have to go to Bitcoin. And that's been my guiding principle, I suppose, that I want to be in control of my life. Yeah.
I absolutely love that, Erik. So a follow-up question on that. Are you living on a Bitcoin standard now? You still got one foot in the fiat world, one in Bitcoin? I
think I'm probably one of the Bitcoiners in the world that's been on a Bitcoin standard the longest. I know there are some people who have been doing this for a decade or so, but for the last 4 or 5 years, I haven't had anything in fiat at all, even if it would cost me. It's not about the money. I mean, just a quick question there, like how much would it cost you? How much money would make it okay for you to have slavery in the US? How much money would be okay for you to accept the Holocaust? How much money is it okay for you to accept all these other tragedies? None, okay? None. And it's the same thing with fiat. There is no amount of fiat that could justify touching it, knowing what I know about the tremendous harm that fiat causes. It is not okay to be a part of a system just because you need it when you know about the tremendous harms that it causes. So that's been why I've been staying away from Bitcoin, more than just a fascination with Bitcoin itself, a disgust of fiat and what it stands for. With that said, what does it mean to be on a Bitcoin standard, right? I had to convert true fiat to pay most of my bills. I've had to convert true fiat to buy most of my groceries, buy plane tickets and whatnot. Of course, I've used Bitcoin directly as often as I can, and thanks to a very big and strong and healthy community that we have locally and around the world, that's been possible. It's been possible to buy Bitcoin directly from others. It's been possible to buy a lot of essential goods, actually, through others. In Norway, where I'm from, we also have all the way down to farmers who accept Bitcoin, so you can actually eat and heat your home and many other things using only Bitcoin. But yeah, for me, the last 6 years have been a Bitcoin standard, but a Bitcoin standard dependent on converting to fiat at the execution point. But that means my principle has been to touch fiat for as short amount of time as possible and as rarely as possible. Yeah.
I love that, Erik, and I absolutely respect that and 100% agree. Unfortunately, I'm not there yet. Maybe this conversation might give me a little bit of kick of the up the arse to change that and move towards it. I definitely, when I'm paying for things, especially in relation to the channel or where someone's put in proof of work, I'll always push Bitcoin onto them. I've got a guy that makes the thumbnails. A gentleman in India reached out to me. He said, "Your thumbnails suck, bro. Can I do them for you?" I'm like, "Absolutely, you can. Do you accept Bitcoin?" He's like, "No, but you can pay me in stable coins." I'm like, "I'm not paying you in anything aside from Bitcoin for my channel." I said, "I need help. I respect that. The work that you've done is good, but you either accept Bitcoin and I go find someone else." And he's like, "What wallet do I download?" Or like, "How do I get Bitcoin?" I'm like, "Download this wallet." And it's been a happy relationship ever since. And, he's got his own expenses and stuff. I said, "Man, just hold on to as much of it as possible." So saving 60% of it. We've been working together for 8-9 months now, and he is just so happy. Like Bitcoin changes people's lives, man. And sort of like in relation to what you were saying, people come for number go up technology. That is Bitcoin. Mathematically, it's designed to go up and to the right forever, denominated in fiat. However, after spending a while in the space and reading the books and studying, listening to people like yourself, watching podcasts, we realize that Bitcoin's a whole lot more than that. This is the separation of money from state, in the words of Nico Moran from Simply Bitcoin. I truly believe that, and I think that's what you were saying. So this separation of money from state, I guess first off, what does that mean? And then I'd like to lead into what we're talking about before we hit record, about the dark side of Bitcoin, because it may not be happy days for everyone, at least not straight away.
Well, the separation of church and state and the separation of money and state, these are sort of parallel traditions that run much deeper and much longer than the invention of Bitcoin. And I would argue that in this case, Europe is the spiritual birthplace of Bitcoin. It doesn't seem to have dawned on any other civilization until Pythagoras that numbers may hold the key to wisdom and truth. When Henry IV was made to stand in the snow outside Canossa waiting for the Pope to ask for forgiveness, he started that separation of state and church, which we now are sort of the direct heirs of when we try to separate the power of money and state. Maybe I'm talking myself a little bit away here, but I just wanted to contextualize a little bit. Like the battle that we are in, a lot of people think it's a new battle, and people point to the parallels of previous battles, but I think it's one ongoing battle of controls of people's minds and hearts. And of course, now we have a tool which is uniquely powerful for accomplishing this. Connecting into what you just said about how things might not turn out exactly the way we did, though, we see that now with Goldman Sachs and these players coming in. We know BlackRock owns a lot of Bitcoin now through its ETFs. We see the US and other countries proposing strategic Bitcoin reserves, and even Bitcoiners eagerly celebrating states accumulating large amounts of Bitcoin, maybe because they hope it will pump their bags, maybe because it seems like an exciting fork in the road. But it may not be that we become as free from state influence over money as we hoped. One scenario that I think is fascinating is, of course, the MicroStrategy scenario, because this to me seems to be the most dangerous attack on Bitcoin of all. And it's very fascinating with people celebrating Saylor. But what you're doing is that you are, let's assume the strategy works, okay? So move beyond that debate completely. Strategy works, it's brilliant. It's going to make Saylor the richest man in the world, and the bag holders for a while will seem like geniuses until you realize that what you've created is a honeypot that can easily be 6102'd by the government. And if that doesn't happen, if Saylor is serious about never selling his Bitcoin, what you have created is a treasury that can issue fiat based on Bitcoin. And this is interesting because it's basically the same thing that happened with gold, but much, much faster. In Amsterdam in the 1600s, you have the Amsterdam Whistle Bank, which to keep the gold safe for its citizens, first offers to take the gold in and keep it safe and issue certificates, right? 1-to-1, by the way. So a stock in MicroStrategy, the Amsterdam MicroStrategy, until eventually, of course, it holds so much of the gold that it is able to issue certificates beyond its holdings. And for the lack of alternatives, since people don't hold gold anymore, these pieces of paper become the de facto currency. People start using, they gain monetary value, and they became IOUs that people since have inflated. That's the beginning of fiat, really, the Amsterdam Visa Bank. And I see dangers of MicroStrategy basically setting itself up, possibly intentionally, by the way. Saylor may be much smarter than what he publicly shows, and he already seems like a very, very smart guy in public. So for there to be no underlying thought or strategy that in some way involves what happens when we hold such a large share of the Bitcoin supply, and either the government wants to take it to back their own currency, or you want to position yourself to become the new central bank. Either way, it may not be the vision that many Bitcoiners have of what it becomes.
Yeah, that's intense. I've had a couple of people on lately to try to understand this MicroStrategy play that's going on. Getting into Bitcoin, I came through shitcoins. Unfortunately, whatever it is, what it is. Very quickly, it led to Bitcoin. For that, I'm grateful for. But then since going to Bitcoin and then Bitcoin only, my purpose here is to be able to save my time in a store of value that cannot be debased, that cannot be taken away. That is mine, that allows me to be sovereign, so I can just get on with my day, can keep providing value to society, and then save that value in something that's not going to be taken away from me. That's how I see Bitcoin. And then, like, the ETFs, cool. It's number go up technology. MicroStrategy seems like a leverage play on number go up technology. But to me, it fundamentally takes away the point of Bitcoin. We can hold this thing in self-custody when we do it the right way. No government entity, institution can get in the way. They can't stop it. They can't confiscate it. They can't debase it. Like, what are your thoughts about self-custody? Is it something that it's like nice to have, or is it something that should be essential for people going down this rabbit hole?
So I think we will never live in a world where most people self-custody. Maybe 10% of the population will ever self-custody Bitcoin. The rest will either just have such small amounts of Bitcoin that it doesn't make sense to go through the costs and trouble of ensuring that level of security. For them, a hot wallet will be all they need because all they have is 500 sats. Which, by the way, is not that different from how it is today, right? I mean, most people do not need a bank vault because they have $500 in their account. However, there will be a certain segment of the population which essentially set them up as the feudal lords of the future. We own extremely scarce pieces of land that people will be desperate to acquire to live in the future. And just like in the past, the people who don't have will be forced to work or desperately seek the attention of those who do. And I imagine that with the hollowing out or weakening of government institutions the way we have today, the massive political entities that we have today, and perhaps a breakup of many states, maybe into smaller entities, citadels, cities, city-states, etc., the authority necessary to enforce most kind of legal claims and breach of the law and so on will eventually devolve down to people who have the majority of resources in an area, which will be Bitcoiners. At which point you have essentially started a feudal process in which Bitcoiners are feudal lords. The self-custody people are feudal lords over the people who only have hot wallets. Now, on a civilizational scale, the curious thing about that is it seems to me historically like we imagine that Bitcoin is so much better than gold, but there are more similarities to gold than Bitcoin is also acknowledged. One of them being that the hardness of gold is part of what broke the Roman Empire, and when it did, it's the Roman Empire's inability to finance itself after having tried to clip the gold coins for too long, eventually led to a dark age. We call it a dark age, although in reality it just means the absence of a strong central authority that could cohesively create a narrative. so that you're left with a vast array of different narratives that have yet to form any kind of form that history can make sense of. And so it seems chaotic to posterity, but for people living in that moment, it's a moment of extreme opportunity and risk and change, basically. But once that is done, the gold is still there. The hard money is still there in the middle of all that chaos. And it does flow and accumulate over time to certain families and certain individuals. I think we'll see the same thing with Bitcoin. Some people, some families will be smarter than others. Some will be able to maintain that smartness over generations. Those families will become so dominant that they will start emerging as lords and kings, essentially. And the curious thing about that kind of emergence is that is how gold started to become re-centralized. There was no king or country that was strong enough to centralize the gold for another 1,000 years after Rome fell. It took 1,000 years, and it would never have been possible if you didn't have a 500-year period before the Reformation where gold was flowing upwards in the system through the feudal system. And at some point, gold becomes so centralized again that it's possible to create something like the Amsterdam Distal Bank, where all the rich people put their gold in there because they all have accumulated so much of it. And so that is what I don't have any other framework, right, for understanding the future than what I've seen happen to hard money in 1,000, 2,000 year perspective in the past. So that's one thing I expect. And then that might be a good thing, because it seems to me like inflation and civilization are in fact connected. We like to think that inflation is only an evil and bad thing, but it does seem like civilization depends on a certain amount of centralization of the hard asset, allowing the central authority to inflate civilization. And at some point, of course, that inflation goes way beyond the hard asset, and then that continues for an extended period of time. In our case, it's gone on now for 500 years or so. Inflating everything, inflating services, inflating infrastructure, inflating the number of people alive until the bubble bursts, because inflation does hit the end of the road. And that's where we are now. When in 1,500 years, Bitcoin has again been re-centralized and we're ready to inflate a new civilization based on Bitcoin, we may return to where we came from in the big picture. So it's early in the morning here. It's 6 a.m. So if I'm a little bit less coherent and structured in my thoughts than I usually am, I'm kind of just free balling here and spitting thoughts. But I hope that makes some sense.
Erik, you're operating at such a high level. I'm glad you're a little bit sleepy, because it gives me and my brain a chance to be able to catch up, mate. So,
and if I need to add more details or explain it more thoroughly, because I'm throwing in some references here that I realize might be very European centric, or may depend on a certain amount of knowledge of history that most people don't possess. So feel free to dig into things that you think is unclear here. But I do think that the fall of Rome and the long journey from the fall of Rome to the point where we were able to start inflating a new global civilization, so to speak. Rome wasn't global, but it was Mare Nostrum, right? It's our sea, it's our world, it's the world as far as they know. A new civilization like this, I don't see any particular reason why Bitcoin would take a different trajectory once we take that 1,000, 2,000 year perspective. I could throw in more thoughts there. Sorry,
it's insanely interesting. I sort of had a thought. So, like, I'm reading a book at the moment that Lawrence Lepard recommended on a podcast called The Lords of Easy Money. And basically it's just talking about what the Fed officials have done pretty much since 2008 and the levers, and talks about like the crazy financial engineering that Jerome Powell got up to, 15 years ago, and how that's playing out now. But the reason why I bring that up is, like, I was a kid during 2008, 2009, that global financial crisis, but I really remember it. And then something happened, I think in 2013 or 15. And then obviously like 2020, like the closest like major financial event. But then like the yen carry trade, which happened earlier this year, or if we go just back last year, like the two largest bank failures in US history Bitcoin has noticed it, but the rest of the world didn't. The Bitcoin has paid attention to the yen carry trade, and like that could have been like another financial crisis, like 2008, 2009. What it feels like is like it's an earthquake, and like the tremors are getting quicker and quicker and quicker. And like, I've no idea how the system is still held together. Like, I don't know if they've got really strong masking tape, like packaging tape, holding it together, or cable ties. But like, what are your thoughts with the traditional financial system? So for us, because I want to dive into like $100 million Bitcoin and how that will happen, mathematically certain over time. But like, for us to go from like 100,000 to $100 million Bitcoin, the financial system can't really be there for that to happen. In my opinion, maybe it can. You may have a different view on that. But how long can it last for, I guess?
I think taxes are actually the key here. Taxes is future expected revenue for the government. It's what holds up most of the credit, the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, so to speak. And the willingness of people to continue paying taxes to a large political entity is both the reason why there will continue to be a demand for fiat, because people need to earn fiat to pay their taxes, and the government won't accept anything else. So that is the primary cause of ongoing demand for fiat. We need the fiat to pay the taxes to the government, and therefore we continue. And that sounds like a small thing, but that is actually enough to maintain this machine for probably decades. Actually, it already has, right? You pointed out that the system seems rotten enough that it should have collapsed, but actually there is such a strong mechanism there that it will continue to have a certain value for quite a while. But of course, that value really starts to deteriorate if people have a tool to evade taxes, and they do now. Capital and people are far more mobile than they were before the internet, obviously. And with Bitcoin, we now have a tool that doesn't really localize your wealth at all, except for perhaps in your head, if you so choose. And that is, I think, the point where, okay, if people then start to withhold taxes, or if a lot of capital is taken out of the system, then of course that hollowing out of the machine starts to really be felt, and we could see fiat really, really, really collapse. By then, though, I would presume that any government with any wits would have started to use their own machine to acquire as much Bitcoin as possible. And I guess that's what we're seeing now with the U.S. Strategic Reserve. Russia is debating the same thing. Rumors around many other countries. They are trying to turn now this money print, this fiat system, into a way to acquire a hard asset instead. I think they see the writing on the wall.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like, Saylor the other day saying that the US government should sell all their gold for Bitcoin. Like, what are your thoughts in regards to that? Good idea, bad idea, amazing idea?
Well, I've been in this space long enough now that I'm starting to have second thoughts, if that's allowed to say. And that doesn't mean that I would like to go any other way. I'm starting to see a few of the risks and the costs that we maybe were willing to ignore in our honeymoon phase with Bitcoin. And one of them is, of course, that as much as we like to ridicule critics when they say this, the internet must survive. And that seems to us like an obvious given until you visit Europe and you start looking at the aqueducts and you start realizing that massive infrastructure, no matter how many people are dependent on it, even nations, can still fall completely out of with disrepair if there is no strong political entity able to channel and coordinate resources on a vast scale. So ocean-going cables around the world, for example, which we largely depend for the global internet to function today, is there any reason, and especially given actually some of the effects that we know or expect Bitcoin to have on big political entities, is there any reason why we can't imagine them becoming the future aqueducts if people struggle to coordinate the resources and work necessary to maintain them? And when that point comes, okay, we look towards the sky and we hope for the satellites to hold us going. Well, that lives in a very precarious and vulnerable state where civilization needs to be stable and concentrated enough to maintain the ground operations of those satellites, or they will simply fall out of orbit and land on Earth after 2 years, and future generations will stare at them and wonder if they were built by giants. So when we talk about selling all the gold for Bitcoin, I believe that it's a good idea to acquire as much Bitcoin as possible, but I actually do believe that it's a good idea to balance this with a certain amount of analog assets that are available also in a future aqueduct scenario. Although I don't believe that is like something that is likely to happen very soon. I'm thinking 500 years from now, actually, for that to play out. So maybe in the short run, sell all your gold, buy Bitcoin. Just make sure you start having some analog assets again if things start looking shaky for global infrastructure in some future civilization. And by then, of course, we could already be interplanetary. Maybe we're already at Mars. Maybe the fall of the internet will strand our Martian cousins, and they will be lost to our civilization for another 1,000 years when Bitcoin finally allows us to inflate a new technological civilization that can call them up and ask how they're doing.
Man, you've gone down some rabbit holes. So this is a personal question. Like, before Bitcoin, were you always this deep in your thinking philosophically, or was having the foundation of Bitcoin allow you to dive deeper into hypotheticals or extrapolating the future out?
Well, I think I would be lying if I said I haven't always been. I'm the youngest person in at least Norwegian history to do philosophy at university level at 16. So I think philosophy has always been with me, but that was, of course, long before I knew anything about Bitcoin. And I think being Norwegian, I lived in a world which was very state-oriented in its thinking until at least until 2008, 2009. I think I thought entirely within that framework. And then, as you said, the financial crisis changed everything, right? We started to think like, is this really how it has to be? Is this really how it's supposed to work? Is this really in the interest of humanity and of me, myself, and my family? It took a while, of course, to discover that there was now a tool that could expand the overturn window of what kind of philosophical possibilities we can possibly imagine. And then along comes Musk, which I think is really a fascinating thing, because he has brought so many things that were almost outside of the realm of possibility into the imaginable, and not just the imaginable, but something that people now almost expect to happen. It's it's something that seemed impossible 5 years ago, and of course that then changes how we can apply our mental frameworks to reality. It changes everything. But suddenly we have to imagine what would it mean if there were two human species on different planets. How would they evolve differently? Would they continue to be the same species, and for how long? And if they lose touch with each other, what happens to those civilizations in the future? Do they become rivals? Do they become potential friends? Will they lose touch and reconnect? If we reconnect with them, maybe we will be able to call them much sooner than we'll be able to reach them. So maybe we will, for 500 years, be stuck just calling these cousins, not knowing how to get there. Yeah, all of these things are new things, right? 2 years ago, I could not start playing with those ideas. 2008, I could not have started playing with those ideas. At 16, I could not have started playing with those ideas. So in some ways, all of this is new. In some ways, it's old. Yeah.
Mate, that's absolutely incredible. I didn't know you studied philosophy at school. It makes so many things make so much more sense. So the dark side of Bitcoin could play out, and things could get a little bit harder, either for a short period of time or a long period of time. But so like that's one side we could go down. What if like it was just hyper Bitcoinization? It turned out to be amazing.
Oh, it will. Like it will. I am pointing to really large civilizational trends, and I'm pointing to some of the pitfalls that are there. But I think we are not wrong in that the existing system is so fundamentally broken and dark, to be honest, that Bitcoin transition to hyper Bitcoinization will be amazing for a lot of people. And a lot of the pitfalls that we point to, like we talked briefly before we hit record, that Bitcoin's rise could lead to a dramatic reduction in world population. That sounds terrible because we like people, but maybe it isn't. Maybe these people won't be killed. They will just die off, and we won't replace them. And we see that already in birth rates and so on, slimming down civilization to the amount of people that can usefully be put into activity under a Bitcoin standard. For those people, for us who have Bitcoin, Hyper Bitcoinization will probably be amazing. Incentives will be aligned. We will not be defrauded year by year by inflation. And maybe we can hope for humans to behave better because the incentives they are living under will be, I don't know if pure is the right word, but they will be less corrupted than what they do now. So yeah, I think hyper Bitcoinization will be great, but I think it will lead to some dynamics that could lead to situations that we don't anticipate. Whether they are good or bad is actually not really something that we can say, right? I mean, it's just a scenario.
Yeah. And we'll know slowly then suddenly, I'm sure. Erik, I brought it up at the start. You put out a few predictions in January, on the 23rd of January 2023. I've got this thread in front of me, man. Like, so insane to be able to read it and then to be able to read the responses. So like the first prediction, I just want to go through a couple of them. Number one, far more countries will rapidly adopt Bitcoin as it became clear El Salvador's bet paid off. I can't see the responses for this one. It won't bring it up. I can bring up the comments for the other ones, but like, obviously that's playing out right now. Strategic Bitcoin reserve, other nation states. What I found most fascinating was the people saying that it's never, ever going to happen. So like number two is many central banks will actively acquire Bitcoin, will not acknowledge it. Number three, several nations will default on their fiat debt, fueling exit to Bitcoin among citizens. That one hasn't come to pass yet, but the central banks...
I mean, people forget just how many nations default every year because it's not the big ones. But every year there are a few nations that default. And of course, there are the small, poor African nations or something like this for the moment. But I think that is a disease that we will see spin out of, expand dramatically. Sorry, continue. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no, I think that's all. That's fair. Africa, like I love this one, and this is what I want you to expand on. Africa will leapfrog most of the world in real Bitcoin adoption. Man, that sounds amazing, but what do you mean by that?
Well, they're not going to start setting up ETFs and Goldman Sachs investment banks there. It's going to be regular people who either don't have access to good financial infrastructure, or the financial infrastructure is very, very poor or corrupt. There's no bank branches in every town around these countries. They don't have access to the kind of bank accounts that you and I have. There's so many reasons to use Bitcoin that simply aren't present in the Western world on a individual level. And actually, I would recommend checking out Anita Posch and Joe Nakamoto, for those who are not familiar with them. Great people, great Bitcoiners, and currently in Africa. And Joe is in Kenya, I believe, and he has been tracing how there are these solutions already in place that seems almost seems futuristic to the rest of us. Now, I didn't read the details on this. So I recommend people go and check out Joe Nakamoto's writing on this. But there are already systems in place that allows people to use Bitcoin in their everyday life in almost every shop around Kenya. And these are solutions that we are still sort of dreaming about in the West. So I think on the ground, in terms of real use of Bitcoin, which I wrote real adoption, as if though one type of adoption is more real than others. But I guess what I mean is on a personal, individual level, are you going to have Bitcoin? Are you going to be using it for daily transactions? And there, I think Africa is much better positioned than the rest of the world. With that said, Africa does have less resources to start with. So this could lead to a global wealth transfer, right? I mean, Africa acquiring more Bitcoin at an earlier stage because of greater need, but then having less resources, so not being able to acquire as much Bitcoin as the West can at a later point. But this should then cause a certain type of equalization of global wealth distribution, right, flowing to the people who are early. So yeah, I haven't actually looked at the numbers of that, but that would be interesting to see. I'm sure it's possible to create a proper theory about that.
That would be really interesting, and if you do go about making it, I'd love to be able to see it. And I guess something that's kind of poetic about it is like if there's more people within Africa using it, and there's just like the law of numbers, if there's more people, then that means more people are going to get it and save it and like hold on to as much as possible. So if another wealthier country comes in and overtakes them, it's going to lift up their purchasing power like even more anyway, so they keep winning, and that'd be absolutely awesome to see. Like what's happened with central banks, the IMF, World Bank going into Africa and things like that, and like really pushing them behind, putting them into a lot of debt. I think Bitcoin, it doesn't come free. It requires a lot of proof of work, but for the people that put that time in, I think they rightly deserve it.
I think it's amazing to see El Salvador accepting a $1.3 billion investment loan from the IMF now, which basically means that they free up public expenditure, that they can now reinvest in Bitcoin. So essentially what you have done is, on a nation level, implement the Saylor strategy, but making the IMF print your money. It is absolutely brilliant. And I can see that happening. Obviously, you can't spend the IMF money on Bitcoin, but you can use it to free up other money that you can spend on Bitcoin. Clever accounting.
Really interesting. I've been asking a few people about this IMF loan, because like my first reaction was like, oh shit, like they've sold their soul to the devil here. Like what's going on? They don't need to do this. But like I like that. And then I also had another thought, like Bekele just announced that they've found like $3 trillion in gold deposits. If they use the IMF money to mine gold and they sell the gold to buy Bitcoin, that's pretty cool as well.
It is, but I mean, these gold deposits that are being announced, they're a bit overhyped for a couple of reasons. Why? It's very expensive to extract this gold, even if you have discovered it. So for a nation that extracts it, you're still going to end up with a lot smaller premium than what you would have done if you just had a gold bar ready to sell, so to speak. It's kind of like when you have this announcement that, a planet or an asteroid has been found that has as much gold in it as the whole gold supply of the world. Well, that's great, but you're going to have to get it and extract it. And by the time you get to Earth, it has pretty much no value because the cost of getting it is so much higher, right? Now, that's not the case with El Salvador and these countries, but it is definitely a factor. The other factor is, of course, the value of gold. If this was something that was extractable, it would immediately collapse the value of gold. I do think, of course, if I was El Salvador, I would try to extract it, convert it to Bitcoin as quickly as possible, even if it does come with a cost, and even if it does collapse the price of gold, it'd probably still be a really good investment for you to do. But just on the bigger picture, all these massive gold reserves being discovered comes also with a sort of self-destruct button for gold. So I'm not sure if you can spend $3 trillion of gold on Bitcoin in El Salvador the way it is right now.
Yep. Another thing that I'm grateful for is that, like, there's 21 million Bitcoin. Once we reach that, once we mine the 21 million Bitcoin, we just can't mine anymore. But like flipping from gold and Bitcoin's hard money. Gold used to be, to an extent. And it's fine. It's worked really well as a store of value for the last 4,000 or 5,000 years. There's just something better. But there's this conversation that goes on, number 6, with your predictions here. More countries will launch experimental CBDCs in a desperate attempt to stop Bitcoin, but they'll fail. Before you answer, Erik, I'd just like to give a bit of context. Australia is one of the leading countries in the world on CBDCs. Pair that with, they tried to pass this disinformation bill. That got shut down. Like, thank God for that. That was so crazy. The bankers putting clauses in there saying people like myself couldn't warn people that the banks aren't safe. Like, ladies and gentlemen, the banks are not fucking safe. Truly, they're not safe. Get your money out. But like, I couldn't have said that. Go straight to jail. Okay, so that failed, but then they've just passed an under 16s bill where kids under the age of 16 won't be able to access social media. How the fuck's that going to work? The only way that it's going to work is they give every citizen a digital ID. Why do they want to give every citizen a digital ID? So they can bring in CBDCs. So like you're saying here that they'll fail, but I hope you're right, because Australia is very much walking towards central bank digital currencies. They're doing everything they fucking can to get this dystopian shit in.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of reasons why I don't think it could possibly work. Number one is simply just the technical architecture of this. It took us all of human history to design a system like Bitcoin. It is going to take a little bit more than 14 years for a committee to design something better. On a more game theoretical perspective, though, for each individual, what you have is a closed system in an open world. And for each individual within that closed system, it will always make more sense to have access to the open world than to have it in the closed system. Of course, everyone in that closed system, Australia in this case, may agree that everyone else should stay in that system, but everyone's individual incentive will be to convert your CBDC to Bitcoin, so you have access to the global system instead as quickly as possible in any way possible. And this, of course, will hollow out the fiat system, the CBDC system's ability to enforce itself more and more as value is taken out of that system. Australia is a bit of a curious case, though, because you're an island. You may be one of the places where it's possible to force citizens to do this for the longest.
Don't say that shit, bad.
For the longest. I did not say it will succeed. I just said it may be able to hold on by its nails longer than other places. You see a little bit of the same thing going on in the UK. Being surrounded by water is a tremendous advantage for any government, quite simply. It's much more different in Europe, of course, where you have 48 countries, and I can drive through 4 of them this afternoon if I don't like what you currently are trying to implement in mine. This creates competitive forces, right, between nations, or before the EU, at least it did. Limiting the excesses of certain countries. Europe is a different case, right, because you have the ECB. And a transnational currency, and I don't know where to go from there. Yeah, okay.
To add on to that, like, I got a bit of a question. You're saying that people just swap their CBDC for Bitcoin, but like, I want to challenge that in 2 ways. Like, number one, they're probably just going to ban it because it's a central bank digital currency. It's digital. They can program it so you can and cannot buy whatever they deem fit. And I'd like to back that up with, say, Commonwealth, which is Commonwealth Bank of Australia, one of our biggest banks, so one of the top 4 banks here. They already limit you to $10,000 a month into Bitcoin or crypto. They're shutting down ATMs, they're like where you get cash out. They want to have less cash, less bank branches. If you pull cash out, every time you pull cash out, it's $3 fee. There's other banks here that if you go in, so they're already like sort of trying to put roadblocks into, number one, having cash, number two, to be able to have digital cash.
All of the things you mentioned reduces the value of the CBDC, not Bitcoin. All of the things you mentioned reduce the usefulness of the CBDC. Why would you want a currency that you can't convert when you can have a currency that you can convert? Why would you have a currency with limits when you can have a currency without limits? All of these things are short-sighted gateway keepers to stop people from moving from the one system to the other. But in reality, they just make the system you're trying to protect worse and less useful. And so, I think these are actually arguments against the success of CBDC in the longer run. They may limit some of the off ramps in the short run, which, by the way, is connected to the other thing, is that a country, on a national level, a country is also part of a game theory here, right? So a country itself will at some point be forced to either reckon with its need to accumulate the hard assets. Because nobody else in the world, by the way, is going to use your CBDC. China is not going to accept the Australian CBDC as payment for any of its goods. It's going to accept Bitcoin. And because it's the only currency it can accept without a counterparty risk, where the other counterparty can't just give you that currency for your goods and then print double amount again and then do that over and over again until they've taken all your goods for free. That no country can do that to itself, right? So every country will be forced to use Bitcoin for international trade eventually. And at that point, the CBDC is really starting to look very hollow. You can't use it for international trade. You can't convert it internally to Bitcoin. It has all these limits and guardrails and whatnot that makes it less useful as a currency than Bitcoin. It's starting to look like a very hollow project. Not the fact that, without having looked into the architecture of the Australian project or anywhere else, it is quite simply extremely difficult to design such a system in a way that can theoretically hold up against Bitcoin, which is so perfect in so many ways.
Yeah, I agree. And there isn't any money, no money has ever existed in human history that can hold up to Bitcoin. That's just the nature of Bitcoin. And I like what you're saying. And as you're talking through that, Erik, I do agree. However, I think also what I'm hearing from that is, say they try, go ahead with digital IDs, CBDCs, they can still succeed in the short term, and it's just being able to ride that short term where you can't get in and out of it. So maybe now's the better time to get as much Bitcoin as possible and self-custody as possible for everyone listening. What you're saying here, so number 7 of your predictions, critics will increasingly panic if they didn't already secretly position themselves and buy Bitcoin at any price. Got a couple of things I want to frame this with. Let's start off with Bitcoin's biggest advocate, Peter Schiff, is having a freaking meltdown about gold being sold for Bitcoin. I think I feel like he may be losing the plot. But then tie that in with people like Senator Elizabeth.
I feel like he's been a Bitcoiner since 2013, and part of his shtick is to pretend otherwise. And it works. It works. People won't stop talking about him. He's made himself one of the most relevant voices in Bitcoin simply by pretending like he doesn't own it and like he believes in gold, even though his tweets are so at some point people think that he's lost the plot. What I see is somebody who's trolling the world so hard and wants to see how far can I push ridiculous statements while people still think that I'm a gold bug.
Yeah,
like because now I see it. I see his tweets, and I can't possibly believe that he believes any of this. It is simply not consistent with what he has said in the past. It is not consistent with the level of insight that he actually does reveal in some of these tweets, especially when it comes to the hard money qualities of gold. So just to shoot in there, I don't think Peter Schiff is a gold bug at all. I think he's been I think he and Max Keiser sat down in 2013 and decided to play good cop, bad cop, and then laughed between themselves. And since then, they've been throwing shit at each other on Twitter, while both have been cashing in heavily on followers and capital. Brilliant strategy.
Interesting and very brilliant. And maybe to back that up with what you're saying, like last year or 2 years ago, I started speculating that, all right, Peter Schiff can look at us with a straight face and say that he doesn't buy Bitcoin, but he's not telling us that he doesn't control access to a trust that holds Bitcoin. That's the speculation that I was going down. Like, he's a smart man, he's got a trust. But what we found out, I don't know, 2 months ago, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a little bit shorter time, doesn't make any sense within Bitcoin day in, day out. But his wife owns Bitcoin and has owned Bitcoin for a long time. So maybe Peter doesn't, but his wife does. Like, can Peter really say he doesn't own it? You know, the reason his wife owns it is because he's got the gold brand.
And why can't he just lie?
Yeah.
People do that, you know.
Yeah, they could. And, you know,
I think you're probably more. I think you are probably more right. I think there is probably some clever solution like this. The wife holds it or something like this. But there is also no reason why he couldn't just say that he doesn't have any Bitcoin. In fact, I would recommend most Bitcoiners don't. If anyone asks you, deny fervently that you've ever held any Bitcoin, unless you are one of the silly people like me and Sean who have already exposed ourselves to the raw arm of the law. There's no reason to make it very public how much money you are carrying around in your head.
Well, you should never say how much Bitcoin you own. I 100% agree with it. I just, maybe for yourself as well, man, like human history is just such an interesting point of view, and Bitcoin's that solution to make someone's life like fucking amazing. Like really incredible, and change every aspect of what they see as reality, or they can choose to ignore it and they can live a shitty slave existence and be in control and work for fucking fiat dollars that, like you were saying, drive the slave trade, that drive wars, that cause homelessness, addiction, like everything bad with society. So yes, like I've exposed myself, you've exposed yourself. But this is so fucking important. If I can help one person, I know I've helped more than one person. So be it. Like, I'm willing to die on this hill. It's that fucking important. But in general, like that, yeah, don't tell people. But coming back to this thing, the credits, all right?
I just want to support you there. That obviously it's very key for Bitcoin that we do have some advocates, and that some people are willing to stand up and say that this is something I have and I have it for this reason, and I think you should have it too because it will be good for you and your family. But yes, it's not. That doesn't mean that every Bitcoiner should make a big point out of having Bitcoin, and it doesn't mean that Peter Schiff couldn't have more Bitcoin than he pretends to have on Twitter. But okay, enough about Peter. We also have zero basis for this claim. I'm not saying that Peter is lying. I don't know. I'm not saying this is just my theory. It seems to me obvious that Peter knows too much about hard money to have actually ignored Bitcoin and is tweeting things that are too nonsensical for him to really believe it.
The last thing I'll say, and you can jump onto this if you want to, about Peter Schiff, but I just hope and pray that he's not lying, because when I was younger, I used to tell a lot of lies to myself and to other people, and you're making a deal with the devil. It destroys your soul. It destroys your self-concept. It destroys the way that you operate in reality, that you perceive reality, like who you are, the energy, your aura, like whatever we are as humans or spiritual beings or whatever. Lying, for me at least, just distorted everything about me and everything about the world. So I hope he can say with a straight face, with truth behind, that he doesn't own any, and it's in a trust, or his wife owns it. Because I know what lying does, at least to myself and my soul. So
that's a really good point, Sean. And lying is always a compromise with reality, and reality is really, really stubborn. So you build up this depth to reality in a sense, and that depth has to be paid by someone. I think that is where the soul crushing, the soul dissolving elements of lying comes from, your depth to reality. I hope you're right too. I hope he's an honest man and simply misguided. But I hope you'll forgive me for speculating a little bit.
Yeah. Well, definitely. And the thing is, whether it's Peter Schiff or not, but there will be people that are lying, whether it's about Bitcoin or anything else, and it's hurting themselves. Like, as much as it's misleading other people, and like what I really don't like about Peter Schiff is he has turned some people off Bitcoin. Like, part of that is they need to take 100% self-responsibility for their actions and not just hear one fucking voice. Like, Peter Schiff is just one loud voice, whatever. But anyway, like, moving away from Peter, the critics will increasingly panic if they didn't already secretly position themselves. So Peter Schiff, a critic, not a critic, we'll see. But then there's like people like Elizabeth Warren, Jamie Dimon, as well, are still on the negative side of it, as well as like the ECB came out, I think, a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, really against Bitcoin. However, on the other side, we are seeing people that were critics, like famous within Bitcoin space, Michael Saylor, but then famous within TradFi is Larry Fink, the founder of BlackRock, was really against it. He's now come out, saying this is a flight to quality. But what was most surprising was last week on the same day, Jerome Powell, and this is paraphrasing, saying Bitcoin's not coming after currency. It's like basically coming after gold. It's digital gold. And then like a couple of hours later, President Putin saying you cannot get in the way of it. You can't stop it. You can't stop it. So people that were critics are now coming onto the favorable side. And there's like sort of two camps. There's like hardcore critics and there's state hardcore critics, but then there's hardcore critics that have educated themselves some way, or they've got a tap on their shoulder and they're changing their tune. Do you see more of that? Like, are they just playing a game? Is Jamie secretly accumulating? We know JP Morgan's been offering Bitcoin to their high net worth clients for many, many, many years, while telling the public that it's a scam.
There's a certain point at which not holding Bitcoin, even if you still believe, even if you still don't get it, it is so clear to you that the risk profile of not holding it is higher than of holding it. And so I think that is what you're really going to start seeing first, right? I mean, people starting to accept that I don't get it yet. I don't see why it's rising, but I do see that I'm exposing myself to tremendous amount of risk if I don't have this as part of my portfolio in some way. Because what if I'm wrong? You know, so what if I'm wrong? I think people like Larry Fink and not Elizabeth Warren, but the people like Larry Fink are well versed enough in risk to realize this, that there comes a point at which you cannot sit there and have any ideological or even intellectual commitment to a certain point of view if reality keeps going against you. And at some point, you simply have to balance your risk, the risk in your portfolio, and say, okay, let's include this here. I'll make it 10% of my portfolio. If I'm right, I've lost 10% of my wealth. But if I'm wrong, I've protected 90% of it. You know, so as opposed to sitting here and just stubbornly insist until all my money is gone. And so I think that is what you will see first and foremost. And then you have on a more personal, individual level, like less than these famous people. Imagine dating a guy who is still against Bitcoin right now. Like there
sorry, women. Like fuck.
There must be some. There must be some girlfriends out there right now looking at their anti-Bitcoin boyfriend, going, "But honey," and at some point it just becomes pretty embarrassing in a sense to be the boyfriend who hasn't positioned himself. And so there, I think you will. You could also take that risk portfolio thing there again. We have a guy in Norway who's a very sort of outspoken critic, but he speaks so much about Bitcoin, and he has a beautiful girlfriend. I can't help but to think to myself that if I was him, I would at least make sure to have some Bitcoin so that I wouldn't lose the girl as well as my wealth.
Yeah. I think, you know, Bitcoiners, they will be the new financial elites. And I think the people that are here early enough putting in the proof of work deserve to, because they're the people that are going to do good things like for society. But like talking about people not owning Bitcoin or thinking they missed the boat, and like on that point, when I got into crypto, you know, it took me 2 weeks 5 years ago before I found out about Bitcoin. And then I went 90% Bitcoin, like within 2 weeks. And then the shitcoin lasted for a little while, but it's just kept going into Bitcoin. But now it's 100%. Like that's all the mind virus, a distortion. And it's taken me years to remove like all the programming, the narrative, the psyop of what crypto is and that narrative. It's just fiat 2.0, but like almost on like steroids or drugs. Like it's even more insidious, I think, in so many ways. But there's this guy at that time, we'd message back and forth about different shitcoin projects and things like that. And then there's a point where I'm like I really woke up. I'm like, man, all this is a scam. Like, this is all narrative driven. And he's like, no, it's not. I'm like, yes, it is. And I'd like just woken up and I saw it so clearly. I'm like, this is all fucked. Like, I want nothing to do with it. And I tried warning them over and over again. I'm like, that's all good, bro. It's your money. It's your choice. It's your life. It's your choice. But like over the last few years, I've been trying to say, hey, like, make sure you get a little bit of Bitcoin. Like, I know you're still playing around and you're doing that. And he's like, nah, bro, can't afford any. I'll win big on this and I'll buy Bitcoin. I'm like, that's not how it works. Like, you just have to buy Bitcoin. Anyway, long story short, he messaged me 2 weeks ago and said, hey, I'm just reaching out. I've created a meme coin and I've put a fair amount of money in it. And I don't think you'd be interested, but I was just wondering, this paraphrasing, it's up on my X, I screenshotted it. He's just wondering if, I could come on your show or you could advertise it for me. And I just did 30 laughy faces. And then I'm like, fuck no, bro. I said, thank you so much. This made my day. And then 30 more laughy faces. And then he came back to me and he's like, screenshot this or whatever. Fuck you, you're a jerk or something like that. I think it's even worse than that. And so I just blocked him straight away. So this is someone I was friends with in high school, liked to cut out of my life because he was still going down a certain path with addiction and stuff like that. I needed to get clean. I needed to cut him out, got clean. And really good friends. He was a really cool dude, especially in our younger years when we were both up to trouble and just doing stupid shit. He was a cool kid to be around. And then after I got clean, maybe 5 years after that or whatever, reached back out, connected. And then a couple of years later, we connected over Bitcoin, over crypto. But then with him not getting Bitcoin and still being in that path of still being a stoner, still renting, got a girlfriend, unhappy relationship, unhappy job, just unhappy with who he is, where he is, and still trying to get rich quick and still how do you say it? His thinking was so fucking distorted that I don't want that energy anywhere near me. And I think that's going to happen more and more. So that's me as a friend, but we're in a relationship, as a friendship. And I'm like, you're not a Bitcoiner, fuck off out of my life. I want nothing to do with you. That's going to be the same with girlfriends or whatever it is. They're like, why didn't you get Bitcoin? Look at your thinking. It's so fucked up. I don't want anything to do with you. And that sounds maybe a little bit arrogant that only the Bitcoiners are going to have a good life or something. But I think it's because of the foundation that Bitcoin is. It's just math. It's just truth. It's not a distortion.
Yeah, I think Bitcoiners are going to be very strict about this. I mean, I had a personal story here where even though I've been in Bitcoin for a very long time, I made a big mistake in 2023. I organized a Bitcoin conference and it ended up costing a lot more than I had budgeted for. And it made a very, very deep cut in my Bitcoin stack, which had been painfully acquired over a very, very long period of time. And naturally, despite knowing better, this hurt my soul very deeply. And it gave me some demons for a few months after that, where I relapsed into old bad habits of not seeing the future, of stoning, of not stacking as I should have. It just felt a bit hopeless having worked so hard for something that just fell apart so very quickly. And with that, of course, what was left also fell apart. And when I shook out of that and realized, oh my God, what is happening now, and I turned to other Bitcoiners again, I discovered that a lot of them had permanently locked me out of their mindset because they had seen the path that I was going down after that mistake. And it's taking me a long time to recover that reputation and those connections and those relationships. And that's for someone who has a long track record of being a Bitcoiner. So I can just imagine how hard it will be for people who have consistently rejected and avoided Bitcoin and consistently gone down that road throughout this entire journey to then somehow regain the respect and the reputation and the connections that they need to succeed in life. So yeah, just backing you up there. Listen, I have 3 beautiful children who all need to go to various types of private institutions right now.
Yep.
So my wife is standing at the door, signaling that I need to end this conversation. But I'd love to chat with you again in the future.
Dude, let's absolutely do it. But Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, and get out of here, man. Thank you so much. What a journey.
Thank you for inviting me. It was great to chat with you. Love to do it again in the future. Come on my podcast when the opportunity arises. And I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Perfect. We'll talk straight after Christmas and we'll make it happen.
Perfect. Right. See you soon. Ciao.